Good evening. We hope you have enjoyed the poster session and the concurrent workshop session today. And now we're very excited for our third and final plenary of today. And this panel plenary session is on higher education and industry partnerships. So we have an awesome moderator and some awesome panelists here. But before we get started, I have one quick announcement. If you presented a poster today, we are closing down and unpacking. So if you did not remove your poster after you finish presenting, your posters can be found on the resource table right outside this door. So definitely, if you want your poster, look for it on the resource table because we are breaking things down in the poster session room. So I'm really thrilled to bring up next Lee Zia, who is the Deputy Division Director of the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation, to give us some remarks.
Wow, you know, the energy, the buzz is still like yesterday. I mean, it's 24 hours later, it's still going on. So kudos to all of you for bringing all that energy. Thank you, Iris, and thank you all for giving me a chance to tee up this last panel. You know, for the past several years, we've been having a massive debate about the role of government, and it's really not a new debate. When you think about it, the opening sentence of our Constitution has the phrase, "in order to form a more perfect union." And that really connotes a notion, a concept of a continual examination of ourselves and this grand experiment in self-governance. To be sure, the tenor of that conversation has taken on new dimensions in recent years, which make it seem new and certainly increasingly shrill. But they're very new and very challenging socioeconomic circumstances impinging on the debate, and that's, we can't ignore those. For example, the increasing the dramatic rise in income inequality, and of course that puts STEM, that's right in STEM's wheelhouse. And by the way, let me just, it's a sidebar comment, on Tuesday in the New York Times, there's a terrific op-ed which is a memoir, a personal memoir of an individual who was sharing the experiences, the exact experiences that Sarah Goldrick-Rab yesterday spoke about so eloquently and passionately. The author is Anthony Jack, who is a professor in the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and the title of the op-ed is "I Was a Low-Income College Student. Classes weren't the hard part." And then if you go on, so I encourage you to go find that. It's really, really quite good. As this debate about the role of government is continuing, we're also having a simultaneous deep debate about the role of higher education in our society. And again, it's not a new debate, but it's happening within the same socioeconomic challenges that the first debate is. And the role of the government, that is. It's particularly relevant to the public institutions, and we have well represented on the panel tonight, the public institutions, but it's relevant there, but I don't want to say that the privates are not in the same boat, and those of you who are at private institutions, your stakeholders are asking exactly the same question about the role of higher education. There's not enough time. I'm not going to go take a deep dive into that debate about the role, in fact, many roles of higher education. But I would venture to say that while specific employment has not necessarily been the purpose of higher education, or education at all levels, in fact, I would contend that preparation for employment, there's certainly a reasonable expectation that that should be one of the purposes of higher education, or education. And you know, whether it's life skills, good citizenship, communication skills, teamwork, interpretation, argumentation, and so forth. The list is very, very long. And that expectation about those kinds of attributes is certainly heightened today because of the socioeconomic circumstances that we're in. But at the 50,000 foot level, let me take I will try to take a stab at the original question about the role of government. And I'm going to rely on, and it's the role of government and by extension, the role of higher education, be it public or private. And I'll lean on Barney Frank, the longtime member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, who said, government is the name of the thing we do together. And I love that phrase. And in that spirit, nurturing our society is also a collective responsibility. And to bring it to the panel, I think that higher education and our nation's employers should and can be better at making common cause. There are lots of examples of the way higher education and industry can collaborate. I'm going to just touch on one because it's of particular interest to NSF right now. So here's some data from some reports. In 2013, Frey and Osborne, who are two researchers at the Oxford University Martin School, tackled the question, how susceptible are jobs to computerization? And they found that 47% of total US employment is at risk of computerization. And ironically, they used machine learning and mobile robotics to get to that data. Right? Go figure. Then more recently, the McKinsey Global Institute in 2017 used that methodology and applied it to the global economy. And the paper's, it's a terrific paper, but here's an interesting fact, is that they, and I'm at that point, I have to make sure I get the data right here. They estimated that 50% of the activities that people are paid to do in the global economy have the potential to be automated by adapting currently demonstrated technology. So that's 50% of the activities. That means the things that people do. It's not jobs. And while less than 5% of occupations can be fully automated, about 60% of those occupations have at least 30% of the activities associated with that occupation. Those activities could be technically automated. So these estimates raise all sorts of scary questions about the future of work. But where I see enormous opportunity for higher education and industry partners to collaborate is not on trying to define the future of work, but rather to collectively identify what is the work of the future and how the two enterprises can actually collaborate to provide more opportunity for students. But how are we going to make headway? Well, that all comes back to you, the people in this room. The fact that you're here demonstrates your commitment to advancing the agenda of promoting and increasing and broadening student access to higher education, and also persistence and college completion. It's often said that all politics is local, and if that's true, I would contend that all progress is personal. It really starts with you. So enjoy the rest of the meeting, enjoy the panel, the rest of the meeting tomorrow, what you're going to learn, the networks that you're establishing with each other. Thank you for what you do, and most importantly, thank you for who you are.
Thank you so much, Lee. So I'd like to introduce the moderator next. The moderator is Steve Bomball. He's the Senior Vice President of College and Career Access. He leads work to ensure student access and maximize college and career opportunities. As head of the College and Career Access Division, Steve oversees enrollment and financial aid programs, including CSS Profile, Student Search Surface, the Access to Opportunity Initiative, and scholarships programs. Additionally, he oversees the partnership with Khan Academy to provide free, high-quality SAT preparation for students, as well as a partnership with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. These efforts are designed to increase college readiness and college completion for all students, with a special focus on lower-income students, first-generation college students, and students of color. So I'd like to bring Steve up now to moderate the panel.
Thanks, Iris. Can everybody hear? Everybody in the audience hear? Yep. Okay. So I'm asking myself how a college literature major came to moderate a STEM panel. My high school chemistry teacher would be very proud. And the reason is that I work at the College Board, and the College Board, we produce the advanced placement courses. I think all of us are aware that if you take a look at the global economy, much more so than in the past, jobs and economies are being driven by STEM-related fields. If you look at the United States, the composition of our STEM fields is not representative of the American demographic. At the College Board, we looked at the student composition of many of our advanced placement STEM courses. And what we discovered was that the sort of demographic disparities we see in STEM fields in the workplace were reflected as early as high school in the classrooms. So we put our heads together and we scratched them, and we wanted to come up with a very intentional, evidence-based way to address this inequity. And one of the efforts in that regard was the development of an advanced placement course called Computer Science Principles. Whereas the AP Computer Science class before that had jumped immediately into the hard coding like Fortran and C++, this was a more practical application of building apps, building websites, developing games. It was intended to be an immersion into the sort of experience that could produce coders for Silicon Valley and the like. We're also very intentional about recruiting girls and African Americans and Latinos to take this course. And this was because you could look across the United States and you would find entire states where not a single girl, not a single Latino, not a single African American student sat for an AP computer science exam. In 4 years, which is a relatively short period of time, we have quadrupled the number of girls in high school who are taking AP computer science courses, and we have doubled the number of African American and Latino students. And we think these sorts of efforts should be scaled and should be emphasized in rooms like this. So, and there's a very long way to go, obviously. So with that in mind, we're going to have a fun panel discussion today. And I'm going to start with Judy and ask her to introduce herself, and we'll move from right to left.
I'm Judy Stavely, and I'm currently a program manager for the United States Air Force contractor, and I'm still in research and development.
I'm Dan Greenstein. I'm a chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education.
Hi, I'm Eve Riskin. I'm Associate Dean of Diversity and Access in the College of Engineering at the University of Washington. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering, and I also lead our advanced programs to advance female faculty in STEM. And I'm here because I'm PI of a 6-institution STEM consortium grant where we're redshirting students. Hope to talk about that later. Thank you.
I'm David Mattingly. I'm a professor at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm also a PI on an STEM because I did theoretical quantum gravity for a long time, and my mom said, try to do something useful. And so I'm sort of in the same boat as Eve. We come at this from the higher education standpoint.
Okay. Before we dive in, I want to make sure, folks, that we run this according to schedule. I see that our clock isn't working, so I will look to you to give us a thumbs up when we have about 15 minutes to go. Great. Perfect. All right.
Now it's working.
All right, there you go. It's magic. It's STEM in action. So we're going to start off with Eve. And my question for you is, how have things changed since you became interested in STEM?
Okay. So I went to college. I spent all of the 1980s in higher education, and I got electrical engineering degrees. I went undergrad to MIT and I went to grad school at Stanford. When I finished my PhD, I was one of 2 women who got EE PhDs out of about 80 students. And if I look back, we talk now about microaggressions, and I could probably spend the rest of the panel listing them, but I don't think you want to hear all of them. They were just in the water, but there was no language about them. There were no resources. You just internalized. So we really believed as undergrads that the women only got in because you were female, even though it was only about 20 or 25% women at the time. And so you might wonder, if really they were letting us in because we were women, why weren't there half of us? And so I'm really gratified now that there's much more awareness of the importance of the climate, so that hopefully people are learning that they don't have to say everything they think. I've been very happy to be working on the advanced programs, which, if you're not familiar, the idea about advanced was that it wasn't the women who needed to be fixed, it's the system. And so programs like all of us here in this room are doing, we're trying to fix the system so that we can bring in more populations to STEM, not just fix those populations to make them more like the majority males whom we typically welcomed into our classrooms. But in the meantime, we also need to be equipping the students to survive in these climates. So it's better now. That's the short answer.
So Eve went to college at MIT and got a PhD at Stanford, so you are clearly an underachiever. In a room like this where you have leaders in your fields, I think it's often helpful to give folks clear examples of things they can do when they leave this room to help redress these issues. So along those lines, what specifically should we do to ameliorate these challenges in the pipeline as it relates to careers in STEM? Give us some tips, Eve.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. Again, I think everyone in this room is already doing some kind of that work because they've taken the effort to get these STEM grants that often are not well recognized by your academic department. I think it's just really important that people are making the efforts to make sure that you're welcoming everyone in your classrooms, into opportunities. The best practices for faculty recruiting, they say don't just sit there and wait for applications, but call up your colleagues and say who's coming out of your postdocs or your PhDs. And then when they say Bob and George and Larry, if you say, well, can you think of any really strong women or really strong underrepresented minorities, they'll come up with more names. And so this is something all faculty can be doing. Same thing at the student level. Make sure that just because somebody is quiet or somebody is less confident, they could be fabulously brilliant and they can be excellent engineers, but they may not be feeling very comfortable. And so I think as a faculty member or administrator or staff person, realize that excellence comes in many forms. But I think, again, I'm preaching to a choir here. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
When the College Board was brainstorming on things we could do to address these disparities in STEM, it was people like Judy who we would talk to about what our approach should be. Judy, you were at Frederick Community College, where you increased underrepresented minority students who were in STEM-related courses at community college. Tell us about what you're doing now to continue these efforts in your role at the Washington Academy of Science. And actually tell us a little bit about what you did at Frederick Community College.
Okay, so I was a previous professor at Frederick Community College. I was there for about 11, 12 years. And I taught forensics and ran the biotechnology program. So biomedical sciences and biotechnology is really driving the STEM field right now, especially on the government side and in the industry. So there is a real need for workforce and workforce pathways. So when I was developing research with my students, I got involved with the Washington Academy of Sciences and with NSF. 3 years ago, my students and I did the Innovative Challenge. I had just taken the position for the program management, biotechnology position there at Frederick Community College, and I needed students. I had 6 students in my program, and I needed to be creative and innovative to figure out how I was going to recruit students and even just meet the 6 students I had. And we made a biotech club, something as simple as a biotech club, and we got the 6 students together, and I can't thank them enough. They're so great that we still collaborate until this day. But we got together and decided to do this innovation challenge project, and they became a really tight-knit team. And we put this project together not knowing that we would make top 10 in the nation and come and present on Capitol Hill. And they got really great learning experiences from that takeaway of presenting their first research project at the community college level, along with getting a scholarship. And on the faculty side of things, I learned how to, partake in NSF grants and other community scholarships that were presented at the Innovative College NSF whole program that they gave us during that entire week. I encourage the community colleges that are here to partake in that. My students did learn how to do basic research skills, communication, learn soft skills. And, but the Washington Academy of Sciences, what we're still doing to fill the gaps of minorities is get out there and try to start implementing workshops and getting out there and doing mentoring with students at the high school level and try to, encourage them to do the research pathway and kind of guide them into the workforce and help them maybe get in, collaboration with the professor that maybe they might mesh with to help them just guide them along the way. And I think that's, the biggest thing that my students had was mentorships. And just guiding them along the way until they got that job that they needed. And we developed this workforce pathway over the 3 years I was running that program.
I'm going to throw an unscripted question out, and then we'll come back to our regular scheduled programming. Often in conversations like this, the diagnosis is that girls, underrepresented minorities, don't have the academic skills to do this kind of work. My observation is that often what's lacking are networks, are relationships. I'm wondering if I am alone in this observation or if this is the sort of thing that any of you have seen in your careers.
I could jump in really quick, because I'm female, sorry. I'm Latina, and I have mentored other Latinas, and we do get that perception of, I can't do it. And it's environmental, it's also psychological because of what, our culture that we grow up in. I was one of the first to graduate in my family. And, I'm an overachiever. A lot of people know how many degrees I have and how much I've gone to school. And I love science and its passion, but you have to find those students that love passion also. But if, you have to get those mentors and those collaboration and networks and have people tell these minorities or even just regular students, you can do this. There is a way, and there's that motivation that once you give that student, like my 6 students, they were very diverse, and they thought they couldn't get to the Capitol Hill. And once they did that and they saw what they could do, they were pumped up. they're like, we can do this, and they built the confidence, and now they go out and they're making a lot of money and they have great jobs.
Wonderful. Eve, did you want to jump in?
I just haven't heard somebody say that in a while, so I think I'm really fortunate, or maybe they know better than to say that to me. So I just think it's such a uneducated, ridiculously biased thing for people to say. So I just don't have a good snappy comeback. Sorry.
All right. Amen. Amen. All right, Dave.
Yes.
Your work is particularly focused on bridging transition points between high school and college, college and industry, as a strategy for diversifying STEM fields. First of all, can you define what you mean by transition points and talk to us about how this strategy makes STEM fields more plausible to the folks you're serving?
Sure. So, as we heard yesterday, and as we're hearing here as well, there's a lot of pressure on all college students, but especially students who are not part of the majority group or have other financial pressures, and it's a continuing pressure. You heard about the cash stress. How do I live from week to week? What do I do if I'm not food secure or housing secure? But beyond that constant stress, and that's bad enough, there's also peaks of stress when people are put into new situations, and this is not unique to college students. We all go through it. And anytime, what is it? Moving is the second or third most stressful time of someone's life because it's a transition, it's a displacement in this regards. And so one of the things that we look at are, besides just alleviating the everyday stress, what also can we predict, can we understand what these transition points are, these sort of critical inflection points, where perhaps a little extra intervention or whatever might make a larger bit of difference. And so in particular, one of the things we look at is the expected, and these can be anything. These can be, for example, as you mentioned, high school to college, but they can also be, hey, I broke up with my significant other. I have a financial stress, something as simple as a car breaking down. If you think about a student who requires a car to get to classes, how much is a car repair these days? A couple $100, right? $500? Well, $15 an hour, that's over 30 hours of work. There's no savings to make it up, right? There's just, you either do the work, get the money, repair your car, you don't go to classes. And when you do, if you do work that extra, you're now a week behind in your classes, okay? Because you had to spend that 30 hours doing your work. So there are, besides just the expected ones, the known transition that we see, there are also a lot of these unexpected transitions. And the things that we study that we try and address is how can the institution that we work at, how can these systems work to actually react quickly and react properly to when students have these sorts of unexpected problems.
So one of the themes I'm hearing from you, Dave, and from you, Judy, is often in institutions of power, when the doorways are being widened to admit folks who haven't been through those doorways in the past, the expectation is for the new admittees to do all of the adjusting. What I'm hearing you, Judy, and Dave say is that you think it should be incumbent on the institutions of power themselves to adjust to the new entrants. Am I hearing you correctly?
If I hear grit or the students at fault, which still happens, maybe you haven't heard it. If I hear that one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind, okay? I mean, let's think about it, all right? Come on. A kid's interested in science, right? And you say, oh, they don't come in with the academic preparation. Well, who was responsible for the academic preparation? It's not the kid, right? When it comes in, he doesn't know, and they don't know how the college system works, or they don't fill out their add drop form in time, or they don't do their finance right. Whose fault is that, right? It's not really the kids, because we're the ones who are responsible for building systems that are accessible to everybody, right? And not expecting, okay, that every student, especially at a public institution, every student comes in with the background that, that I was lucky to have. Right?
Judy, did you want to add?
Well, I have to kind of piggyback on his comment, because I do think a lot of the students, especially at the community college level, they are struggling. And you know, it's not that expensive as a lot of universities to go to community college, but you kind of put that perspective. If they're struggling to pay a community college fee, they must be struggling at home. And so I always had the non-traditional students. They were older, they were either not working, they had to come back and try to get a certificate or a letter of recognition or some credentials to try to get that job. So there was a lot of stressors there, and the majority of my students did have children and a family, and if you put that, you know, along with curriculum and studies and projects and having to pay the bills, you know, it's very rewarding to see them cross that stage and then get that job. But there was incentives also that I needed to use and figure out during that process to keep them in the program, because you would see a lot of students drop out of STEM. So they were so close, and I was seeing them or having conversations with them telling me, I think I'm just going to drop the program and I just can't handle it. I have too much on my plate. I'm like, you got one more class left. Come on, push through it. One more semester and get that degree. And what can we do to help you? And so it was just staying on top and motivating them. You can do it, you know, teaching them self-talk, also incentives with internships. And we did wonderful partnerships with the industry. I have to do a shout out to Integrated Pharma Services. Dr. Mina was great to help not only mentor most of my students, but there was also the state of Maryland that jumped in to help collaborate with paid internships. So once they saw, hey, I could get that paid internship and I get a little cash in my pocket, they built that confidence. Yeah, I can do the job. They got the experience, and that internship experience was crucial into entering the workforce. And all my students, 100% of them that studied under me, got jobs. And those little incentives helped them stay within the program and then succeed.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's a lot of talk about how it's difficult to break a cycle of poverty. As a former teacher who's watched most of my students actually move into the middle class, when they get that first paycheck, when they get that first bite of success, you realize that a cycle of success is hard to break as well. Dan, you've been quiet. We're gonna now give you a chance to shine. You're the chancellor of Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, which consists of 14 universities and 100,000 students. What are you doing to move more students towards STEM degree completion? And within that strategy, what's working and what's not working?
So, you know, look across, there's a range of things going on. You know, we have mentoring programs, guided math pathways, some interesting learning communities for first year intending and meta-major type students in STEM. You know, with varying degrees of success, still early days. I actually want to focus on two aspects which are really done in partnership, and they really sort of kind of pick up a theme which has emerged about STEM really being a pipeline, that the student's journey from high school to community college into four-year college into a job, and can have lots of variations on that theme, is kind of a journey along a pipeline. And so I picked out two which really sort of recognize that and try to create a pipeline from the student's lens. So one of them was actually represented here. It's called ClearPath, and it's run out of East Stroudsburg University by Bonnie Green and her colleagues who have been at the conference. And it really works between ESU and feeder community colleges. And it's an example of how faculty from ESU work very closely with their community college counterparts, not just to, I mean, obviously we have well-developed articulation agreements into STEM majors, but to actually pull the students along those pathways by ensuring that there's good advising and supports right from day one in the community college with tremendous success. They were just showing me that students, the transfer students who go through ClearPath are graduating at a 50% higher rate, in 2 years than the students than the normal population, which is pretty phenomenal in a few years. And it's just a great example of that, partnership and pipeline in creating a more seamless pipeline. The other one, which I can't demonstrate success for because it's just getting started, is an initiative that we're launching to work with employers in high priority occupations, which we can identify in the literature on workforce development need in the state. Our state's one of the couple of dozen which are well blessed with good economic development and workforce data. Working with employers to define the competencies that are required in high priority occupations and to define those competencies in ways which are a little bit more articulate than we just need students who show up and can pass a drug test. Can't really build an educational program around that, it's a little bit challenging. But with those competencies defined and those skill sets defined, then it's possible to kind of auction off to universities and actually two-year colleges opportunities to develop credentialing pathways that meet those needs, right? And then the art there is, or the artifice there is to sort of develop those credentialing programs and to use the statewide purview that the system has in order to provide that quality assurance and assessment instruments that enable employers to view those credentialed students as viable and to enable students to view those programs as viable. That quality assurance is absolutely super important in the center there. The two things that I guess I want to comment on is that, as you think about, the challenge, and Lee pointed it out at the beginning, and we've all touched on it, it is overwhelming in its size. Whether you come at it from an equity point of view, you're 5 times more likely as a wealthy student to have a degree by age 24 than you are if you're poor, or you come at it from a workforce development view. There's not enough rich white people left to educate into the jobs that the nation needs to succeed, or you come at it from a social justice point of view. Colleges and universities are one of the few places left on this earth where students can meet people who are not like them and develop a degree of tolerance, or whether you come at it from some combination. This is a systemic problem. So how do you move initiatives which we've heard almost around the table are the brain children of really dedicated people, right? And they work intensively well in the areas where they operate. And how do you build that in systemically into the fabric of the institution? So you think about system. Well, you have 14 universities, 100,000 students. You can go for scale, right? Right. So I would urge us to think about the work that we encounter in STEM and in so many other innovative areas of higher ed transformation is so profoundly important, and it is so profoundly localized, and it has to become systemic if we're going to reach the kind of numbers. And it's not like we don't know what to do. Each one of us could tell about programs, interventions that we know work. Yeah. So I'm beginning to become pretty skeptical that the evidence base isn't there to scale. It's not like we don't know what to do, right? And so, I mean, I guess that's the challenge that I sort of focus on. How do you incubate these things in a way which allow us to learn really quick and exit those things that aren't working? But as critically, how do we identify a mechanism to take the things that work and replicate them rapidly to meet the needs that we're talking about?
So along the lines of scaling, I want to pull out a little gem that was buried in your comments. And you said in Pennsylvania, you have clear articulation agreements between the community colleges and the 4 years. And at the College Board, when we really dive into obstacles facing low-income students, that's one of the main obstacles. Yeah. So in California, for example, a student who's taking Math 101 at Santa Monica City Community College, Math 101 is the same at Cal State Hayward and UCLA as it is at Santa Monica City Community Colleges. In most states, it's not like that. So you can imagine a student working very hard. She's going to community college, she's trying to transfer, and she realizes that most of her coursework does not transfer. It's tragic. So kudos to you and the state of Pennsylvania for having those articulation agreements. We're going to do a round robin question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions.
Can I just interject?
You
for the
may
one?
certainly interject, Eve.
I'm going to provide a slightly opposing viewpoint because my wonderful colleague Sonia Cunningham is out there. I totally agree that we want to see, bigger numbers of, students who aren't just the privileged white males we've always been seeing in engineering.
Just so you know, I'm a historian.
Okay, yes, he's a historian. But when students arrive at university and they've come from backgrounds where they were the first in their family, or the family was low income, or the high school was high poverty, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help the students fit in our universities and thrive in our universities. And again, it's not about changing those students. It's about having systems in place to support them. And 2 years ago, we had 50 students in our STARS cohort, and we almost killed Sonia, I think. So it's very, very time-consuming work, and this work is one student at a time. And so the scale question is always coming up to us. And the model we've done is, in fact, I need to call a shout out to Tanya Ennis, our friends at the University of Colorado Boulder. They started the concept of redshirting, which really, if you think of athletics, it's a metaphor. Again, the students have extra time to get through the prerequisites because slow and steady wins the race. So then they helped us and our partners at Washington State University start our programs. And then when the STEM Consortium came along, we then brought in 3 more schools. So I think this scaling among universities can work really well of similar types, but we also have to be really cognizant of the incredibly hard and amazing work the staff on the ground are doing with the students, and not suddenly say, Sonia, you should have 200 students this year. That just
Right, and
is
just to
very
be clear, I
difficult.
wasn't, that's not what I was,
Okay.
but you've demonstrated that scale can happen.
It can happen,
And
but-
what's interesting is, just to gloss the point, we basically talked about, the modality that we're moving away from is creating a college-ready student. What we're talking about is creating student-ready colleges,
Ooh, I like
right?
that.
And that's and how do you, that's a mindset shift
Yes.
of a profound, you're basically talking about reskilling an entire industry. I mean, not us, of course, but our colleagues, or many of them.
All right.
I like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I read a Washington Post article earlier this week that mentioned over the last 2 years of the 5.2 million new entrants into the American workforce, 4.5 were African American or Latino, actually mostly Latino. So this future we're all talking about is actually, now we can call it the present. It's here. So I'm going to ask our panelists to give our audience members one thing they can do or focus on when they leave this room to help open up STEM fields in this country to the demographic that is here now, that has traditionally not been part of these fields. And we can popcorn it. You guys can jump in at your leisure.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Well, first off, I have to thank everybody who took the time to actually apply for an STEM grant, because what the grants that are awarded help the minorities or the individuals who can't afford to go to school. And I went through school and became successful because of scholarships. And if it wasn't for those scholarships back in the day to get me through school, I wouldn't be in this position right now. So again, it's the faculty who work hard to write those proposals and motivate the students to put them in the classroom. And again, it's through NSF and AAAS and the organizations out there supporting STEM. There's a lot of different organizations, 501s, 503s, that support STEM, and they don't get recognized that much, but they're doing their part. But without those scholarships to help push students to stay in school, because again, it's not that much money to go to a community college. However, it might be that much money for that one person to finish that associate's degree to move on to a bachelor's degree. And I know because I've been there. And that little chunk of change makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's stunning, this emerging body of research that shows it's often a matter of hundreds of dollars that cause low-income students to drop out. One thing, one takeaway. David.
Sure. I would ask everyone to not only train their students to be technically competent, but also good citizens, in the sense that if we are going to make systemic change, a lot of the struggles that our students have right now are basically, in many cases, because of the hollowing out of the middle class. And much of that has happened because of, frankly, the kind of science and technology industries that we are pushing our students into, not necessarily taking jobs, but changing what their wage structure is, of how we provide wages and living wages to people. And I'd be curious in your article there of how, what kinds of jobs those are, and whether they give living wages or not. And the only way that we will be able to actually not have this happen again in a generation or two, right, from innovation and disruption, which is the disruption of people's lives, is if we also worry about not just getting people into careers by which they can accrue power, but that they will also use that power responsibly. And a lot of our students that we see right now, they have an innate understanding of this because they have been on the other side, the flip side of that. And I would just say that if we can also educate our students that way as well, so that when they do take all that technical knowledge and become the superstar in whatever industry they're at, they also think about the responsibility and these types of people here of the society and the community to make sure that that knowledge and ability is used sort of responsibly, so we don't repeat this again in 2 generations.
All right, thank you. And then there were 2.
I can be super quick. I would just, there's a YouTube video called Did You Know? There's probably a dozen versions of it. It's about 4 minutes long. It gets at this notion of disrupting our mindset, which is about creating student-ready colleges as opposed to having college-ready students. You cannot watch any version of this video without having your mind completely blown off your head and not walk away thinking, oh my God, our industry needs to be entirely restacked. So get your colleagues, buy them beer and pizza, and then lock them in a room for 4 minutes and require them to watch the video and then discuss. And it will, yeah.
That's something we can do tonight.
You can tonight.
We have videos right here. No one leave. No, I'm just kidding.
Music's not so good.
Eve, you get the last word.
Okay, I would say to go and find a couple students to sponsor. The word has always been mentor, and I think we've all benefited from excellent mentors, but I know I would not be here if it weren't for a couple of people who really sponsored me. They really helped me find opportunities. They called out the microaggressions while they were happening, so I didn't have to. Those things, they made a huge difference. And so if you could go find 2 or 3 students, and again, since we're supposed to be talking about industry, call up a colleague in industry and ask, could my student come and have a mock interview with you? Or will you please look at their resume? Go out and, again, this work is every student at a time. And you can change a whole family. Sonia did that with one of our students when we were meeting with Microsoft several years ago, because the student didn't have the confidence that, because of his background. They looked at his resume, they hired him for the summer. The next year, the summer before his last year, they made him a permanent offer, and he is there. And so that was just a wonderful thing to see happen. And Microsoft they're really the lucky ones. So.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. I believe we're going to ask people to come to the microphone stands and ask your questions. If you want to direct your question to a specific person, please say his or her name. Otherwise, we'll do our best.
So I just wanted to add to the list of things that could be done to help make a significant change, which is I think time has come for a system of free public higher education in the United States for nationally. And I think one of the best ways industry could partner in doing that would be to pay higher taxes to pay for such a system.
Thank you. As the head of a large public system, do you have a response to that, Dan?
With the Pennsylvania Promise Program pending in legislation. So I would be careful to look at the data on free college. It doesn't always have the salutary effects that we think it does. There's a handful of programs, there's not enough of them now to have a really good evidence base, but some of the evidence is quite disturbing. Oregon, for example, the majority benefit went to middle-class students. Great, I mean, good. It's important for middle-class students to have access to college too. But I need to look on a case-by-case basis. When people talk about free college, I just want to know, what does that mean? Who's it for? Who's the beneficiary? The design it's not a simple design principle, and I'm not hedging. I mean, education is great, but policy is a really blunt instrument, and it can have some really negative effects, and this concerns me. In a country which has not really done well in policy in service of its poor and its underrepresented. So.
I also just am not a huge fan of free college for a couple of reasons. One, I think tuition at Publix is already really low. People pay more for daycare than they later send the kid to college. Also, it's not just enough to have free tuition. We need wraparound supports, and that costs money. So I love the idea of people from more affluent backgrounds paying more than their share so that we can then support people who need more support. But people have different views. So.
To offer a view somewhere in between, I will just take note of the fact that when I graduated from high school, which wasn't forever ago, I was in Alexandria, Virginia, and our flagship university, the University of Virginia, room, board, and tuition all in for in-state residents was $3,000. 30 years later, it's $33,000. That's a factor of 11. That's 11x. Inflation has not increased 11x in 30 years. So even if it's not free, it feels like the trajectory that we're headed in is not sustainable. Yes, sir. You have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Ah, okay. All right, we have 650 people in here. I know you all have questions. Yes, sir.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for this really important conversation. As I think about some of the things that we face in higher education, one of the things that surprises me is how our budgets align or don't necessarily align with our priorities. And I think about the stated value of scaling and scaling up and scaling out. And at the same time, we know that that requires a lot of training and retraining of the experts that we bring into the academy to help educate our students. And yet, training and retraining gets a very small portion of the overall budgets of the university and the university systems. So I wonder quite frequently how we're going to address this. And oftentimes I find myself thinking about who are the people who are going to address this? And then I'm just shocked to realize that I'm the grown-up in the room. And we're all the grown-ups in the room. And I wonder how we are going to address this rather than keep waiting for someone else to. I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
I think he's interested, yeah.
So we have three college and university folks.
So I can give you a quick answer. Look, I mean, I talked to the Pennsylvania state system is in a pretty interesting situation. Leave it at that. And there's 10 or 12,000 staff and faculty, and 100,000 students. But when I address the staff, I met this morning with the Faculty Legislative Assembly, and but it's true here. None of us expected to be at this massive turning point. I don't know. I didn't. But history found us, and it's hard, like it or not. This is an opportunity of a lifetime to take advantage of the opportunity that we have been given to reimagine public higher education in the interest of this country and its people. And that's a double-edged sword. But at least when I wake up in the morning, there is absolutely no choice in my mind what I grab a hold of. You get out of bed and you go do that task, because not everybody is. This is a blessing. And not everybody is blessed in this way. So, win, lose, or draw, we're going to learn an awful lot, and we're going to try really hard, and the time is now, just as you pointed out.
Okay, so I have a question to turn to the two PIs of the consortiums. What are the biggest challenges that you're facing in actually getting the consortium ideas to work, or however you want to sort of tackle that as a more than one institution, and how are you overcoming that?
Is that for me? So, okay.
For both of you that have questions.
Okay. Go ahead. So I think I heard the question was, how hard has it been working across the consortium? Is that a good synopsis or what are the challenges? I think the challenges are that, it's actually been a lot of fun. So, let me think. I think everything is always more work than you think. Oh, right. I think that the staff on the ground are working a lot harder than you want them to be. I think that's a big one. It's resources, and we talked about it with our third year site review, is that these systems are fabulous. A lot of the funding, and it's the law as we learned, it goes to the students. And so with the need to do the evaluation and the knowledge generation piece, and you're putting staff on the ground at 6 institutions or starting 3 new programs, there just wasn't enough funding such that I'm seeing some people who are working really, really hard, and it really makes me sad. And I want to try my best to try and help them find more resources. So I would say that has been the hardest part. But I think it's been a wonderful collaboration. We meet by Zoom every 2 weeks. We've been doing this for over 3 years. I think we've all made a lot of new friends, and we're really sharing best practices. And even we at the schools that have been around longer are learning ideas from the newer schools and vice versa. So I've really enjoyed it. But writing that proposal was a slog. And it was over 230 pages by the time 6 NSF proposals and budgets got glued together. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Did you apologize to your referees?
Hopefully, I imagine they just read the 15-page project description. But who knows? I did not. So I hope that answered your question.
What other questions or comments do folks have? I see a hand up. Would you come to the microphone, please?
Hi. I just moved from a private university, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., to public university, which is the City University of New York. And I was shocked to see the difference between the 2 universities. At GW, our faculty could easily get thousands of dollars for travel money, $5,000 from different sources, from department and the college. At CUNY, a faculty would be more than happy if he can get $500 for travel. And the teaching load is incredibly different, Our science faculty at GW teach 1+1, and they complain about teaching load. At CUNY, they face a teaching load of 21 credits per year. Recently, that has been reduced to 18, but it's still incredibly high. And yet, CUNY is the place that trains about 250,000 of American students coming from mostly underrepresented minorities. And they are exactly the kind of people that America needs to train. They are doing exactly what the country needs. And yet they don't get the resources. Over the past decades, the budget for CUNY has been going down year after year. It's incredible. America is the richest country in the world. How comes and education is a top priority, and underrepresented minorities are the people that we need to focus on? How comes that institutions like CUNY is not getting money? What's going on here?
Okay, who would like to take that question?
I don't know if any of us can answer that.
That's an existential question. Yeah. Anybody care to?
Welcome to the 99%.
Well, I will make a comment. The CUNYs actually are famously one of the great social mobility engines in the United States for many of the reasons that the gentleman just described. I also think we have this strange issue in the United States where leadership in this country, politically, in media, in the corporate sector, comes from a very small number of institutions. I believe 50% of Fortune 500 CEOs in the United States attended one of 12 universities, and I bet people in this room can guess what those 12 universities are. So the issue that the gentleman just highlighted is actually invisible to many of the people in this country who are making decisions. So diversifying leadership might be a way to get at stemming some of the inequities that this gentleman describes. And any other observations? That's a big question.
There is work to do on the narrative around higher education. The news media picks up almost entirely on what happens at elite universities, good, bad, and indifferent, right? I mean, and the scandals, the recent scandals, a perfect example. It's very difficult for a CUNY or any of the other great publics to get a look in, although CUNY, because of its rate of social mobility, is now known, the CUNY schools, as, having probably, I think they were 7 in the top 10 in the rankings that the Social Mobility Project did. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to realize that the conversation around higher education really needs to be a conversation around the 80% and not the 20%, right? And maybe there's an alignment because increasingly as the policy arena is focused on workforce, elite colleges by definition do not produce the massive numbers that we need to produce in order to meet our skills needs, right? So let's see if we can leverage that in order to change the narrative a little.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only hope in a certain sense, that until that number of students and well-trained students from a larger percentage of American population is really needed to make the country run or make certain sectors of the country run. That's it, yeah.
Judy or Eve?
Well, that's just another example of why I'm not a huge fan of free public education, because I would hate to see I don't know how the funding works at CUNY, but if, say, the state of New York had to divert more resources to places where more people could pay, it may even be worse for these really important institutions. So,
I think we have time for one more question.
So I'm going to follow up on that question, but make it maybe a little bit more concrete. Firstly, I want to thank NSF for taking a chance on my state university and funding us with a clear path. And it's clear because I've met so many people here who NSF had funded at community colleges and at HBCUs and at schools that are really serving these kinds of places. So NSF definitely seems to be putting this forward, and I want to thank them. I know you don't like the word grit, but my team and I, we have grit. We hear no all of the time. We have a model that's working, and we've gone to, you name the top 5 funding organizations, private organizations that fund educational research, and they have said no, 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 no. Meanwhile, they provided a really nice chunk of money to Cornell University for a program they didn't even ask for. So my question is, I'm not willing to wait until there's movement. How can we get these organizations that have money, in some cases more money than NSF, to fund HBCUs, to fund community colleges, to fund the state schools where we have faculty who were first-generation college students, who are African Americans, who are Latinos, teaching these students and know what it takes to get these students to be successful? What can we do to get them to open up their purses to us? NSF has.
All right, we have another easy question that we can answer to conclude this panel. Who would like to take that on? You're a community college person. I'm going to tag, you're it.
That's a hard one because, again, I had to go looking for opening purses to kind of fund us. And I went to the county. I had to go outside of the box from the typical grants and sponsorships. And actually, we did get sponsorships. And I am very vocal and open, and I'm not afraid to ask. And actually, I got a sponsorship for my program donated from the Department of Homeland Security, which I never thought that the government would just say, hey, here you go, here's $5,000, buy what you need for your program to educate these students in STEM. We want that workforce pipeline. We see some, good good students here, and we're going to give you $5 grand. And I was like, help me out. Can you give me a couple $100 bucks? And I was joking, you know, when I was having this meeting with my colleagues. And, you know, one of the scientists sat on my advisory board, and she's like, oh, the director's going to go ahead and give you $5 grand. So that was very exciting. And then, of course, you know, the traditional grants, and then the county stepped up to help in recruitment efforts and funding for marketing and anything else that I needed, and all that came together to make the program and school successful. So I think maybe working out of the box, we're so focused on, you know, traditional grants and traditional, you know, ways of doing things, and maybe just going out and doing something different.
Would anybody like the last word?
We pitched our STARS, or our Red Shirt program, as a pilot, and then we got really great data. And going back to the theme of industry, UW is very active in engaging industrial partners through outside channels, not through UW email, obviously, to approach the state. And in fact, in our last budget, they allocated $500,000 in permanent funding for our STARS program. Mm-hmm. And so working with your state relations people at your campus and showing, you know, across your state the benefits sometimes can be successful. And I think this is your chancellor here, so ask him.
Hi, Ronnie. I mean, I'll pick up on the theme generically. I mean, I think, you know, right now there's a lot of energy in the funding community around workforce. Right. And I mean, you know, obviously NSF has a STEM interest, but, you know, I see a lot of the private funders moving pretty aggressively into workforce. And there's obviously a clear line of sight between the work that you're doing in workforce. You know, engaging industry partners is probably going to be important in that kind of thing. You know, a lot of the philanthropy, private philanthropy, is still interested in the completion movement. And the completion investment, a lot of that tends to go to non-elite schools for obvious reasons. So, I still think there's opportunity there. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about the. About the opportunities. I mean, I think with respect of what, you know, how to squeeze money out of the stone of the university or the system, you know, I think universities and systems are looking at how to retain their students, because retaining students is good for students. It's the right thing to do, but it's also the only financially viable, sane thing to do. And so where you see the kind of results that you're showing in the ClearPath program, you know, that generates a discussion. Gosh, if we could keep 25 or 50% more of our community college transfer students, what does that do to our bottom line, and what does it do to the communities that we serve? So those are really important discussions, and they can motivate action even amongst some of the more recalcitrant, tight-fisted administrators. I don't know any of those, but I'm told they may exist.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you very much. My name is Maria Santisteban. I work at UNC Pembroke. And this question may be a little tangent for the panel because it's not about industry, but we have a president of an Academy of Science. I happen to be involved with the North Carolina Academy of Science, and my question is actually in that direction. What is our role and maybe our obligation to our students? The North Carolina Academy of Science has the Senior Academy, the Collegiate Academy, and the Student Academy. I happen to be involved at 2 levels, and it's always a struggle to have you know, an impact on the students, especially in the Student Academy. We organize competitions and things, but we see time and again that the students that buy into that are from the most affluent counties in North Carolina, not so much from the, you know, the poor regions, and they don't have the access to the universities nearby, etc. Anyway, that's one part of the question. What kinds of things the Academy of Sciences should be doing, and where do we get the funding? Because, yeah, we do that for the goodness of our hearts. You know, we are volunteers, and then we also have to come up with very innovative ways to get money for the things that we do.
So the Washington Academy of Sciences, our main goal is to promote research. We have some great founding fathers. Alexander Bell was the founding father of the Washington Academy of Sciences, and Sir Langley Air Force Base, as everybody's familiar with, was one of the co-founding founders. So the Washington Academy of Sciences was founded around the Department of Defense back in the 1800s. Our mission is to promote research, and we do have a junior academy, and we're actually revising our bylaws to, it's going to take us a while for that, to encourage more young scientists in our junior academy. So right now we do collaborate with over 100 affiliate societies in sciences, but right now we're working with the high schools to promote activities and judge and mentor young students at the high school levels to get them pushed through the STEM and keep them through the pipeline, and kind of do our volunteer part work like what you're doing at your academy to help promote STEM and at the younger level. And then we do offer our yearly banquet with fellowship awards, and we're always looking for publications in our journal. To publish in our journal is free. So anybody have research to submit that is peer reviewed, please send it to the Washington Academy of Sciences, and we'll be more than happy to publish your research or your updates also on what you're doing on your research, or maybe even highlight your school. We can do that. Did that answer your question?
Sort
of.
Okay.
If not, you can follow up after the panel. We'll take this last very brief question, and then you can follow up with the panel after.
Thank you. So I went to undergrad with a brilliant fellow student, wins a modeling contest, graduates with a BS in mathematics, but then works briefly in STEM and then leaves. And I think at some point he would have liked to have come back. And my impression is that a lot of our STEM majors, a fair proportion, land great jobs, but some also don't inside the STEM area. And I'm curious, what role does higher education and industry have in building pathways back into STEM for students who maybe didn't land it while their degree was still fresh?
Great question.
I'm gonna save the best for last. Okay.
I think there's a lot of companies that will pay for their employees to take, master's degrees, and then we offer a suite of master's degrees in evenings. So I taught a class 2 years ago where all my students were at Microsoft or Boeing, Amazon, and they worked all day, and then we'd teach for 3 hours and in once a week, and it fit into their lives. I thought that was a really good model. It also helps the universities, frankly, because the tuition wasn't state subsidized.
And I can rebuttal for you is I partnered up with all the biopharmaceutical companies which had that same program. So we had articulation agreements with 4-year universities where my students would graduate with their 2-year degree, get the job with AstraZeneca, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Government Scientific, all, those science pharmaceutical companies that are housed in Maryland. And then we would do this workforce pipeline, and the agreement was that if they worked for somewhere like AstraZeneca or MedImmune, that they would give them an incentive to go back to school and get their bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And I would say a lot of those biotech companies have those incentives. And even if you work for the military side or government side of things, there is always those opportunities to advance your education career. So that's something that you can tell your students if they're gonna wanna go into maybe working for NASA or government side of science, that those are the incentives that is there for them, that they can continue their education. It's just getting their foot in the door, and that's where the networking comes in. You really got to network your students into getting those jobs. And then once you have your network built up, then they have their alumni association to connect and help each other out. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, let's thank this awesome panel. Thank you.